I spent my entire life building a monument to others. My love, my time, my sweat, my soul. I offered them all as mortar and brick, until one night, standing in a kitchen, I designed, breathing in the scent of a meal I cooked. I heard the words that would bring the entire structure crashing down around me. This isn't merely a story of humiliation. It's a story of an awakening so profound it scorches the earth behind it. If you have ever been a ghost in your own home, this is for you. The memory is etched in high-definition clarity. The soft, golden glow of the hand-blown Italian pendant lights over the vast island, illuminating veins of gray in the Carrara marble countertop. Cool and smooth beneath my anxious fingertips. The air was thick with the rich, herbal scent of the porchetta I had prepared, its crackling skin basted with a painstaking mix of rosemary, fennel pollen, and garlic since early that morning. In the living room, a vintage vinyl record of Vivaldi's Four Seasons spun on the player. I'd saved for months to buy its melodies. Floating through the open-plan space of the house I owned. Every detail was perfect, a stage set for a play I wasn't supposed to be in. It had to be. Cassandra had forgotten, again, to tell me her parents were coming for a casual dinner, which in her lexicon meant a full-scale inspection. The veneer of their effortless, luxurious life needed to be maintained, and that duty, as always, fell to me. I should have retreated to my room. The moment the doorbell chimed its elegant, two-toned melody, I should have sensed the impending fracture in the universe. The first warning was the look in her mother's eyes. A cool, appraising glance that swept over my simple linen trousers and knit top as if I were a curiously placed, slightly shabby vase. "And you are?" she'd asked, her tone lilting, implying the answer couldn't possibly be important enough to remember. Cassandra didn't hesitate. She let out that tinkling, glass bell laugh that never quite reached her cold, blue eyes. "Oh, that's just Clara," she said, waving a dismissive hand adorned with a diamond the size of a glacier. "She's our resident guardian angel. Honestly, I don't know what we'd do without her. She keeps the absolute chaos of this place at bay." The laughter was a physical blow, a sucker punch to the solar plexus. It came from her parents. From their stuffy friends from the club, and from Daniel. My son. He chuckled into his glass of expensive burgundy, his eyes deliberately avoiding mine, focusing instead on a spot on the ceiling. As if suddenly fascinated by the crown molding, I stood there, rooted to the spot, holding the bottle of '97 Brunello I had retrieved from the climate-controlled cellar, my knuckles white around its neck. I felt the smile on my face, a rigid, porcelain thing, as the floor dissolved beneath my feet. And my heart turned to fine, cold ash. I murmured an excuse about needing more wine, set the bottle on the counter with a quiet, definitive clink, and walked slowly, deliberately, down the hall to the bedroom. I'd painted a serene, coastal blue, a color I had chosen for its piece. Their laughter followed me, a cruel soundtrack to my demise. Not one of them, not my own flesh and blood, saw fit to say, "That's my mother." He just let the title hang in the air, unclaimed and abandoned. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat on the edge of my bed, the expensive Egyptian cotton sheets feeling alien against my skin, staring at the Shaker-style door I had sanded and painted myself the week we moved in. I remembered the weight of the pen in my hand, signing the mountain of mortgage documents. My name, Clara Vance, my credit score of 815. My entire inheritance from my parents, all poured into this foundation, this beautiful cage. Daniel had just finished university, his degree in business administration, yet to be tested in the real world. Cassandra was then just a glamorous, ambitious whisper on the periphery, smelling of ambition and expensive perfume. They had contributed nothing but an ever-growing appetite. For the life I could provide. And now, I was the help. The guardian angel. A charming, invisible fixture, like a useful and well-loved piece of furniture. The next morning, I moved through the motions by rote. My body operating on a ghostly autopilot. I ground the ethically sourced, single-origin coffee beans. I opened a can of gourmet tuna for the pretentious, hairless Sphinx. Cat, Gollum, that Cassandra adored and Daniel merely tolerated. When she descended the floating staircase in her skin-tight, heather-gray Lululemon gear. Eyes glued to her phone. Scrolling through a feed of perfect lives, I simply stood and waited at the bottom. She finally glanced up, irritation flickering across her perfectly composed, filler-plumped face. "Clara? Is there a problem with the Nespresso machine again? I told Daniel we should have gotten the newer model." I held out my hand. In my palm lay every key on the heavy, brass Tiffany ring. The front door, the back, the deadbolts, the garage, the mailbox. The keys to the kingdom. She blinked, her long, false lashes fluttering. "What's this?" My smile was thin and cold, a sliver of ice. "Good luck making the mortgage payment now." Her face went slack with confusion, then a dawning impatience. "What are you talking about? What mortgage?" I didn't elaborate. I just walked past her, down the long hallway. Lined with photographs I had framed, pictures of Daniel's gap-toothed grin, his graduation. Their wedding where I'd smiled until my face ached. I passed the furniture I had haggled for at auctions, alongside the walls. I had painted in 100 different shades, trying to make a house a home. I took nothing. Just my worn leather purse, its strap frayed from years of use. And the camel-haired coat I'd worn when I brought Daniel home from the hospital 30 years ago. A lifetime of hope woven into its fibers. I didn't say goodbye. The word was too final, too momentous for what I was doing. Which felt less like a decision and more like a natural law finally asserting itself. I heard his voice as my hand closed on the cold, brass front doorknob. "Mom?" I didn't stop. I opened the heavy oak door and stepped out into the crisp, autumn morning air, the shock of it. Feeling cleaner than anything I'd breathed inside in years. "Mom." He called again, and I heard his bare feet slapping on the cold, damp pavement of the driveway. I kept walking, my posture straight, my gaze fixed on my 10-year-old Volvo parked at the curb. A relic in a row of shiny SUVs. I didn't slam the car door. I closed it with a soft, definitive thump. Because something inside me had broken, but not in the way one might expect. It wasn't a fracture of rage or a splintering of grief. It was a quiet, terrifying snap into absolute, crystalline clarity. Clarity doesn't scream. It doesn't beg. It doesn't need to. It simply knows. And I knew, for the first time in my life, that I was done. I didn't know where I was going, but I knew where I was not staying. The last image in my rearview mirror was Daniel, standing, confused and barefoot in the driveway, his brow furrowed, watching me leave. He had no idea how much he had just lost. And neither did I. They say you don't realize you've been drowning until you finally take a breath. That first night in my great-aunt Rosa's old apartment was that first, ragged, desperate gasp. The silence wasn't peaceful. It was a thick, suffocating blanket of absence, heavy and accusing. The place smelled of forgotten things, old wood, yellowed paper, dust, and the faint, sweet ghost of Rosa's signature lily-of-the-valley perfume. I dropped my bag on the chipped Formica kitchen table and stood there, adrift in the echo of my own footsteps on the scratched hardwood floors. The apartment was a time capsule of the 1970s. Avocado green appliances, wallpaper with a faint, brownish pattern of teardrops. Shag carpeting in the bedroom that had been trodden into a matted path. I didn't cry. I didn't rage. I just existed, a hollow shell moving through the dusty rooms. I slept on the lumpy couch because the bed in the spare room sagged so profoundly in the middle. It felt like sleeping in a hammock. I ate toast with peanut butter and microwaved canned soup from a chipped bowl. My phone remained dark and silent. Not a call, not a text from Daniel. I suppose Cassandra had told him not to bother, that I was being dramatic and would come crawling back once I realized my place. Or perhaps, more devastatingly, he simply didn't care enough to wonder where his mother had gone. My mind kept returning to that dinner, a tortuous loop. The clink of crystal, the boom of her father's laugh, the sound of Daniel's chuckle mingling with theirs. I had raised that boy alone after his father. Thomas decided fatherhood was an inconvenient hobby he'd rather not pursue. I cleaned office buildings from midnight until 4 a.m. and worked a checkout line at the local grocery store during the day. To keep a roof over our heads, surviving on naps and caffeine. When my parents died within a year of each other, their hearts broken from the separation, they left me a small inheritance. I didn't take a trip to Paris, as I'd always dreamed. I didn't buy a new car. I used every single penny for the down payment on that house. A real home, a forever place for my son and his future family. I never asked him for rent. I never asked for anything but a sliver of respect. An acknowledgement that I was more than the landscape. And in return, I had become the resident angel. A patronizing euphemism for a live-in servant. After a week of numbness, I started writing at night. In old, spiral-bound notebooks I found in a kitchen drawer. The kind I used to buy in bulk for Daniel's school projects. Under the weak glow of a single lamp, I filled pages with a frantic, cathartic scrawl. I wrote about the years of invisible labor. How I'd wait in the kitchen after making his favorite meal, hoping for a thank you that never came. How I'd cry silent, frustrated tears in the laundry room, folding his boxers when they'd go out for expensive dinners at new, trendy restaurants. And not even think to invite me. How I'd pretend to be asleep, my door closed, to avoid hearing them. Mock my love for historical documentaries in the living room. I paid for, on the large-screen television I financed. The days bled into weeks. The silence in the apartment began to change. It was no longer suffocating, it was becoming my own. I began to breathe it in, to appreciate its stark, brutal honesty. There were no lies here, no performances, no need to make myself small. Just the groan of the old pipes, the hum of the inefficient refrigerator. And the sound of my own thoughts, which were growing louder and clearer. One afternoon, a sharp cold snap, predicted by the weatherman, had me searching for an extra blanket. I pulled down a stiff, mothball-scented Afghan from the top shelf of the hall closet, and behind it. My fingers brushed against cold, ridged metal. I pulled, and a heavy, rust-streaked metal trunk emerged from the shadows, scraping against the shelf. It was stubborn, the latch seized with age. But I wrestled with it, my hands becoming grimy, until it finally gave way with a reluctant shriek. I expected mothballed sweaters and old sewing patterns. Instead, I found my past. There were photographs of my parents, young and vibrant. Their arms around each other. Pictures of me as a young woman. My hair long and wild, my eyes full of a light I barely recognized, standing before my canvases. I found my old sketchbooks from the interior design course. I never finished, the pages filled with dreams of creating beautiful spaces. My throat tightened. At the very bottom, beneath a layer of tissue paper, was a single, sealed envelope with my name on it in Rose's elegant, looping script. For Clara, when she needs to remember who she is. Tears I didn't know I had left welled in my eyes and spilled over, making dark spots on the yellowed paper. Inside was a deed to this very apartment, made out in my name. Rose had left it to me, free and clear. There was no mortgage, no debt. It was a true sanctuary, utterly mine. And tucked beside it was a check, dated years ago, made out to me for a significant amount. On the memo line, she had written, "For your dreams. Start now." She had seen me, all those years, during my occasional visits. She had seen the slow, insidious erosion of my spirit in that house with Daniel and Cassandra. She had seen me becoming smaller, quieter, more transparent. And she had thrown me a lifeline I was only now, years later, strong enough to grasp. That was the second snap of clarity. The first was leaving. This one was about moving forward. Rose wasn't just giving me a roof, she was giving me a launchpad. I wasn't just hiding anymore. I was rebuilding. I began carrying myself differently. I stood straighter, my shoulders rolling back for the first time in years. My voice, when I spoke to the clerk at the grocery store, or the kind old man downstairs, lost its apologetic, "Please don't notice me" tone. I used Rose's money to buy a capable, second-hand laptop, and began transcribing my emotional notebooks into digital files. But these were more than feelings now, they were the beginnings of a strategy. I looked up old contacts from my brief design career, brushed up on new software, spent hours on design blogs and architectural digest sites. The world of Clara Vance, the person, not just the mother, began to flicker back to life, faintly at first, then with more confidence. And as I built myself up, brick by digital brick, I began to look coldly, clearly, at the world I'd left behind. I knew their patterns intimately. Cassandra lived her life on social media, a meticulously curated highlight reel of luxury, success, and effortless beauty. It wasn't hard to trace the digital breadcrumbs. And what I found turned my stomach. Cassandra Cole Design was a beautiful, breathtakingly constructed illusion. Rendered images of kitchens and living rooms were passed off as her finished projects. Fake client testimonials were posted from stock photo models. Her sleek, minimalist office space, featured in a lifestyle magazine spread, was actually a co-working hub rented by the hour. Their entire life was a house of cards, built on a foundation of maxed out credit cards and breathtaking conceit. I started a second journal on my laptop. This one wasn't for emotions, it was a ledger, a dossier. Dates, names, business records pulled from public filings. Screenshots of Instagram posts compared to their source material. I wasn't just grieving anymore. I was planning. I was arming myself with the truth. They thought I was gone, erased, no longer relevant. But from my dusty, quiet apartment, I was more present in their lives than I had ever been. And I was about to remind them exactly who they were dealing with. The first concrete step was a lawyer. Not for revenge, I told myself, but for justice, for the reclamation of what was legally and morally mine. I wanted the house sold. My name was on the deed. My money, my sweat, my inheritance formed its very foundation. I found Miriam Goldstein through an old friend. She was around my age, with sharp, intelligent eyes behind stylish glasses, and a no-nonsense demeanor I immediately liked. "They're occupiers, not owners," I stated, flatly, sliding the folder of documents across her polished oak desk. "I want them out. I want the house sold." She listened without a flicker of judgment, her fingers steepled. She read through the deed, the mortgage documents in my name. Only, the records of all payments coming from my account. "It's remarkably clear-cut," she said finally. "They have no legal standing. We'll file the motion to list the property for sale this week. They can't stop it." I signed the papers with a hand that did not shake. The pen felt good in my hand, felt like power. That evening, driven by a morbid curiosity, I walked past the house. The outdoor landscape lighting, which I'd personally designed and paid to have installed, was on, illuminating the perfect, manicured lawn. Cassandra was on the porch, curled on the expensive wicker swing I'd bought, laughing into her phone. A glass of chilled white wine in her hand. Inside, through the large picture window, Daniel was visible, lounging on the sofa. I'd scrimped and saved for scrolling on his tablet. Their lives were a play, and they were still acting their parts. Oblivious that the stage manager had just cut the lights and was selling the theater out from under them. It wasn't about punishment, I told myself. It was about equilibrium. It was about justice. And when that house sold, they would finally understand what it felt like to have the very ground beneath their feet ripped away. I didn't slam doors. I didn't make a scene. I watched from the shadows, I waited. And I walked away, the chill of the evening air feeling like a baptism. The first domino had been tipped. The chain reaction had begun. None of them had felt it fall. I've always believed that true strength is quiet. It's not in the volume of your voice, but in the depth of your conviction, in the stillness of your resolve. The day the official notice from Miriam's office was delivered by certified mail, I was sitting in a quiet corner of a library cafe, watching the rain streak down the window pane, tracing paths through the grime. Miriam had said they'd receive it by 10 a.m. At 10:07, my phone buzzed on the table, lighting up with Daniel's name. I watched the screen until it went dark. The silence that followed felt heavier, more significant than the ring. Then I turned it over, screen down on the wooden table. Let the silence speak for me. Let him wonder. Later that afternoon, an email popped up on my laptop. It was brief, devoid of any greeting. Mom, what is this? A lawyer's letter? Please call me. Cassandra is losing her mind. Of course she was. The mortgage was due, and the bank had just been formally informed that the person whose name was on the deed wasn't playing anymore. A week later, another call. Cassandra this time. I let it go to voicemail, my heart doing a cold, hard thump in my chest. Clara. Her voice was tight, strained, the polished, honeyed veneer cracking to reveal the sharp panic beneath. We really need to talk. It's a massive misunderstanding. Daniel says you're going through a phase, and we want to support you. But you're actively sabotaging our lives. It's not fair. It's irrational. I listened to it twice, then saved it. Our lives. Our house. Irrational. The words were gasoline on the dying embers of my anger. My silence, from their perspective, grew sharper, more menacing. It was a silence they could not control or manipulate. 2 days after that, Daniel showed up at my apartment building. I saw his distorted, anxious form through the peephole before he even knocked. He looked haggard, unshaven, his usually perfectly styled hair a mess. His expensive sweater was wrinkled. The usual aura of casual entitlement had been replaced by a frantic, confused energy. I didn't open the door. I didn't make a sound. He knocked again, harder this time, the sound echoing in the quiet hall. Mom? Please. I know you're in there. Clara? We need to talk. I stood on the other side, my palm flat against the cool wood, feeling the vibrations of his knocking. I let him marinate in the silence, in the powerlessness of being ignored, of being an inconvenience. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, I heard a frustrated sigh. The scuff of his shoes, and his footsteps retreating down the hall. The victory was small and cold, but it was mine. The following week, Miriam finalized the paperwork to list the house with a reputable agency. The full proceeds, after the remaining mortgage was paid, would be mine. Every cent. Legally, ethically, emotionally. Cassandra, in a fit of desperate arrogance, tried to fight it. Through a lawyer of her own, she claimed contributory value through her design, input and management of the household. Miriam actually laughed out loud during our phone call. Let her try to prove that in court. She can't because she never invested a dime of her own money. And her management consisted of making lists for you to execute. This will be laughed out of the room. The facade began to crack in public. Cassandra's parents, the formidable Eleanor and Charles Croft, stopped liking and commenting on her Instagram posts. Her so-called clients, perhaps sensing the impending implosion, or getting wind of the legal trouble, quietly distanced themselves. She posted a tearful, carefully lit video to her followers about navigating toxic family dynamics and the unfairness of generational property law, which was quickly screenshot and mocked in local community groups for its staggering privilege. I didn't post a thing. I didn't need to. The truth was doing the work for me. I just kept working on my own plans, my own future, designing mood boards for my hypothetical first clients. At home, I began the painful, necessary process of boxing up the old photos of Daniel, school pictures, where I'd forced a smile for the camera, birthday parties I'd organized and cleaned up after, family vacations, where I'd been the photographer, rarely in the shots myself. I didn't destroy them. I couldn't. But I put them away in a cardboard box labeled Other Lives. The woman who had spent her life building a shrine to someone else was gone. The woman who took her place, sorting through the wreckage, wasn't angry. She was awake. She was clear-eyed. The papers were signed. The house was officially on the market. The listing photos showcasing the beautiful home I had made, now a commodity. I always thought masks were for Halloween or plays. But Cassandra wore hers every single day. Impeccable, smiling, unassailable, a woman who knew her best angles. And her target audience. But masks, no matter how well crafted and expensive, eventually crack under pressure. I was just the one who decided to apply the pressure directly to the fault lines. The idea came to me while scrolling through a local business network, looking for potential clients for my new venture. I had the personal dirt, the credit reports I'd legally obtained, the records of the failed refinance attempts. But I wanted something more solid, more irrefutable. Something that couldn't be explained away as a family dispute. I wanted to expose the professional fraud for what it was. I hired a discreet, highly recommended financial consultant. I told him I was considering a business partnership and needed a deep dive into the company's viability and authenticity. I gave him Cassandra Cole Design LLC. A week later, he delivered a concise, damning folder. What was inside was even more brazen than I'd imagined. No business tax filings for the past 18 months. Forged invoices from fictional suppliers and contractors. Before and after photos of home renovations that were actually digital. Renders from software sites are blatantly stolen from the portfolios of actual, talented designers across the country. Her entire empire was a house of mirrors, reflecting nothing but her own ambition. If this information becomes public, he said, calmly, sipping the tea I'd made him, her professional reputation will be obliterated. There's also potential for fraud charges. If clients who paid for services that were never rendered come forward. That's when I made my move. I printed everything. Then, with a coldness that surprised even me, I found the address of Cassandra's parents. The same people who had sipped my expensive wine, while their daughter introduced me as the help. I packaged it all neatly into a plain brown envelope. No return address, no letter, just a single line typed on a sheet of plain white paper. Everything you admire is a performance. I dropped it in a mailbox across town, my hand steady. The cracks appeared within 48 hours. Cassandra's Instagram feed, once a relentless barrage of aspirational content, #blessed captions, and #design inspiration, went dead. Her website, usually buzzing with pop-ups for her e-design services, displayed a vague, "We're currently under maintenance notice." A planned, high-profile collaboration with a local boutique home store was abruptly cancelled due to unforeseen circumstances. Then, the pièce de résistance. A former neighbor, who still followed the drama with the relish of someone watching a reality TV show, texted me, saw Eleanor Croft leaving their place today. Looked like she'd sucked on a lemon. Yelling into her phone on the driveway. About fraud and embarrassment and cutting off the allowance. Whatever conversation happened behind those closed doors, it wasn't curated, filtered, or styled. It was real. Daniel called that night. I didn't answer. The voicemail he left was frayed with panic and confusion. "Mom, I don't know what's going on. Cassandra's parents got some anonymous package. Documents, pictures they're accusing us of. I don't even know. Fraud? Is that what this is? Did you have something to do with this? You need to call me. This is getting out of hand." I didn't reply. He was finally, truly seeing the real woman he'd chosen over me. The house of cards she'd built, and his own complicity in it. Let him sit in the wreckage. Let him feel the chill of the wind now that the walls had fallen down. I used to think a broken heart was a single, catastrophic event, a clean break. But it's not. It's a slow leak, a constant, quiet drip of disappointment and neglect. That you learn to live with, that you paper over with excuses and hope, until one day you look up and realize the entire structure is rotten, the beams are splintered, and the roof is about to cave in. Daniel was finally standing in the downpour, getting drenched. The notice about the house listing had been served. Cassandra's meticulously crafted mask had been ripped off, revealing the desperate emptiness beneath. With nowhere left to hide, no one left to perform for, he came to me. The source of all the stability he had ever known. The foundation he had taken for granted. I heard his knock, softer this time, uncertain, almost timid. I opened the door. He looked utterly shattered. His clothes were rumpled and looked like he'd slept in them. His eyes were bloodshot and shadowed by deep, purple bruises of sleeplessness. He smelled of stale coffee and desperation. "Mom," he said, his voice a dry rasp. Can I come in? Please?" I stepped back silently, holding the door open just wide enough for him to pass. He walked in and stood awkwardly in the middle of the room. As if he didn't know what to do with his limbs. As if the shabby chic of my apartment was a foreign landscape. "Why are you doing this?" He finally burst out, the words raw. "To us? To me?" I almost laughed. The us was so telling, so ingrained. I sat in my worn but comfortable armchair, calm, my hands folded in my lap. "I'm not doing anything to you, Daniel. I'm reclaiming what is mine. There's a difference." His jaw tightened, a familiar gesture of frustration. I'd seen since he was a toddler. "You're selling my home. The house I grew up in. You're just giving it away to strangers." "You gave me away first," I said, my voice low and steady, each word a stone placed carefully in a river. "You let your wife call me the help. You laughed. You stood there in the house I bought, with the wine I paid for, and you never once apologized. You never once saw me." He stared at the floor, at the faded Persian rug I'd found at a thrift store and loved. "I thought you were being too sensitive. I didn't know it hurt you like that. It was just a joke." I leaned forward, the movement making him flinch. "That is the entire problem, Daniel. You never bothered to know what hurt me. You never looked. You assumed I was just part of the furniture, forever available to clean up your messes, fund your life, and absorb your disrespect." While she systematically chipped away at everything I was. He flinched again, as if the words were physical blows. She's not the person I thought she was." It was a weak, pathetic admission. "That is not my revelation to have," I said, my voice icy. "That is your bed. You lie in it." He finally looked at me, his eyes glistening with unshed tears of self-pity. "I've lost everything. My home, my wife is falling apart. I've lost everything." I didn't blink. I felt nothing but a vast, empty stillness. "No, you discarded it. There's a difference. You discarded my love, my respect, and my trust. You don't get to call that a loss. You don't get to be the victim here." The silence that followed was thick and heavy, filled with the unspoken truths of years. "I miss you," he whispered, the words sounding foreign and clumsy on his tongue. A phrase he hadn't uttered since he was a small boy. "I miss the boy you were," I said. And it was the truth, a sharp ache in my chest. The boy who held my hand crossing the street. The boy who told me I made the best grilled cheese in the world. I don't know the man you became. I don't recognize him. He didn't cry. He just seemed to shrink, to collapse in on himself, the entitled veneer. Finally dissolving to reveal the weak, confused man beneath. I saw the moment his entire narrative of himself disintegrated, replaced by a dawning, horrifying comprehension of his own actions. Not with anger, but with a profound, weary peace. I realized I had finally spoken the truth that had been burning inside me for years. I stood up, a clear signal. I walked him to the door. He turned, his eyes pleading, lost. "Is there any way to fix this? To fix us?" I held his gaze, seeing the ghost of the boy in the man's face. "The burden of fixing it is no longer mine to carry. The question is, what are you going to build from the rubble? And who are you going to be when you do it?" I closed the door gently. Not with a slam of finality, but with a soft, firm click. For the first time, I wasn't the one holding it open for him, waiting for him to come back to me. By the time autumn deepened, painting the city in fiery hues of red and gold, the leaves weren't the only things changing. The house sold faster than expected. A testament to the market and the appeal of the property I had created. I got the full asking price. A sum that left me financially secure for the first time in my life. Daniel and Cassandra were given 30 days to vacate. I didn't evict them out of spite, I did it through my lawyer. A clean, clinical severance. That house had been my prison for too long. And I needed the transaction to be over. I drove past on moving day, a strange detachment settling over me. I didn't stop. I just watched from a distance as Cassandra, her face pale and pinched behind oversized sunglasses, barked orders at the movers, her usual grace replaced by a brittle sharpness. Daniel stood on the now barren lawn, phone pressed to his ear, pacing in frantic circles. Probably on the phone with a landlord or a bankruptcy attorney. I wondered if he ever thought he'd see this day. I wondered if, in some deep, hidden part of himself, he knew I would be the one to finally hold him accountable. Their fall was complete and utterly public within our social circle. Cassandra's parents, humiliated and furious, pulled their financial support entirely. Her business collapsed under the weight of its own lies, the website disappearing entirely, her social media accounts going dark. The word fraud was whispered in the right circles. Daniel, with no job to return to and a mountain of shared debt. He was now solely responsible for, moved into a small, bleak-looking apartment on the industrial outskirts of town. I heard this through Miriam, the lawyer, who relayed the information with professional dispassion. I didn't ask for details, but I also didn't celebrate. This wasn't about revenge. It was about cause and effect. It was about the inevitable collapse of a structure built on sand. Meanwhile, my life quietly, steadily, was becoming something new, something real. I used a portion of the money from the house sale to secure my future, investing wisely. Another, more significant portion, I donated to a foundation called The Next Chapter, which supported women over 40 who were rebuilding their lives after being dismissed, discarded, or underestimated. The director, a formidable woman named Helen, called to thank me, her voice thick with emotion. "This will change lives, Clara." "I know," I said softly, and I meant it. But the biggest change was in me. I had started my own small interior design consultancy, Clara Vance Designs. It was slow going, but it was mine. My first client was a divorced woman, not unlike myself, who wanted to turn her sterile condo into a warm, inviting home. We spent hours talking about colors and textures, about what home really meant. It was the most fulfilling work I had ever done. One afternoon, my phone buzzed. A text from Daniel. Just one line. Can we meet? Just once. I need to see you. I stared at it for a long time, the words blurring on the screen. It had been weeks. The tone wasn't angry or desperate or blaming. It sounded like surrender. It sounded, for the first time, like him. We met at a small, anonymous park on the edge of town. A place with rusted swings and a trail that looped around a dried-up pond. I picked it for its neutrality. No memories, no ghosts. He was already there, sitting on a bench with his hands clasped tightly between his knees. Shoulders hunched against the chill. He looked up as I approached, and for a fleeting moment, I saw the shadow of the boy he used to be, awkward, unsure, waiting for direction. I'm not here to ask for anything, he said, his breath making small clouds in the air. I don't have the right. I nodded, saying nothing, and sat beside him, leaving a careful space between us. I wanted to say I'm sorry. The words were quiet, but they hung in the air between us, real and solid. The first entirely honest words he'd spoken to me in years. A real sorry. I was blind. I was selfish. I was weak. I let myself become someone who could do that to you. I traded my relationship with you for that. He gestured vaguely, encompassing the illusion, the lies, the emptiness. I didn't reply immediately. I let the apology sit between us, testing its weight, its authenticity. The wind rustled the dry, brown leaves still clinging to the oak trees. I thought I was protecting her, building this perfect life with her. He continued, his voice thick with a shame that seemed genuine. But I was just hiding. Hiding from adulthood, from responsibility. And I handed her the pen to rewrite our story. And she wrote me right out of a mother. And I let her. You have a pen of your own, Daniel, I said softly, the words surprising me. What are you writing now? He looked out at the cracked mud of the pond bed. I don't know yet. It's hard. Really hard. But I'm trying to figure it out. Without her. On my own. We sat in silence for a while, two people. Surrounded by the wreckage of our shared past, the chill of the afternoon seeping through our coats. I don't expect you to forgive me, he said finally, his voice firmer. But I hope one day I can earn a place in your life again. Even if it's a small one. Even if it just means a coffee once a month. I miss you, Mom. Not what you did for me. You. I stood up, the cold wood of the bench stiffening my legs. I'll think about it, I said. It was neither a yes nor a no. It was a possibility, a door left open just a crack. And that was more than he deserved, but perhaps what I needed to offer for my own peace. He nodded, a look of profound relief mixed with sadness washing over his face. That's more than I hoped for. As I turned to leave, I placed my hand on his shoulder for just a second. A brief, fleeting connection, a touch that held 30 years of love. And pain and hope. And that was it. Not closure, not a happy ending, but an understanding. A line drawn in the sand, with the potential for something new. Something different, to be built on the other side, in its own time. And I realized that was enough. I didn't need to fix him anymore. I didn't need to be his foundation. I just needed to be free. And I was. I really, truly was. I always thought the word freedom sounded too big, too lofty. Like something reserved for national anthems and history books. Not something a woman like me, in a camel-haired coat, could ever actually touch. But sitting in my small, sunlit office, looking at the mood boards for my third client. A young couple eager to build their first real home together. I finally understood what it meant. It wasn't a dramatic feeling. It was a quiet hum in my veins. It was the peace of knowing my worth was not tied to anyone else's approval. It was the simple joy of choosing a fabric because I loved it, of making a cup of tea exactly how I liked it, of spending a Saturday reading a book without a single interruption. The past was a country I had left. The future was a blank page, and for the first time, the pen was firmly, unshakably, in my hand. I was no longer Clara, the mother, the wife, the guardian angel. I was Clara Vance, designer, survivor, author of my own story. And the next chapter was going to be beautiful. Thank you for watching, for listening, and for sharing this time with me. If you enjoyed this journey, please don't forget to hit that subscribe button so you don't miss the next story. Until next time, take care, and keep cherishing the chapters of your life.